Star Trek Section 31's disappointment is secretly great for the upcoming prequel movie. As the dust settles on Star Trek Section 31, it feels safe to say the newest Star Trek movie was, broadly, a big Star Trek disappointment. For one, Section 31 bucked Star Trek movie tradition by not centering on a starship. For another, despite focusing on the morally gray Starfleet agency, Section 31, the actual actions of Emperor Philippa Georgiou-Michelieu and other characters in Section 31 weren't actually morally complex. But from the beginning to the ending of Section 31, the biggest problem for the movie was how its fight choreography-centered filming made it feel more like a generic action movie than a Star Trek movie. But the fact that Section 31 was an unsatisfying movie does not necessarily mean bad things for Star Trek as a franchise. In 2024, Star Trek Lower Decks concluded on a high note. Another fan favorite, Star Trek Strange New Worlds, has been renewed for 2 more seasons, and the first is expected this year. And Paramount also gave the upcoming show, Star Trek Starfleet Academy, a renewal for 2 seasons. Finally, on the movie front, there is a planned movie focusing on Starfleet's origins in the works, which could redeem Star Trek movies for the current era of Trek. Star Trek history proves a disappointing movie is usually followed by a good one. Counterintuitively, some of the greatest movies in Star Trek history came on the heels of Star Trek's greatest film flops. In the 56 years since Star Trek, the original series went off the air in 1969, Star Trek has released 14 movies. Up until Section 31, those movies have all been either direct continuations of or spin-offs from existing Star Trek TV shows featuring the same characters. To the extent that Section 31 is a continuation of anything, it is Star Trek Discovery, where Emperor Georgiou was first introduced. Star Trek movies have some pretty high highs, but also some pretty low lows. Before Section 31, the Star Trek The Next Generation movie Star Trek Nemesis was ranked as the worst Star Trek movie. Nemesis came out in 2002, immediately before the highest-grossing Star Trek movie, Star Trek 2009. Similarly, while Star Trek the motion picture was far from a flop, in the grand scheme of Star Trek movies, it's by no means the most iconic. But its direct sequel, Star Trek II The Wrath of Khan, is the greatest Star Trek movie of all time. The Star Trek Origins movie has a more interesting premise than Section 31. On top of the general trend for good Star Trek movies to come close on the heels of disappointing ones, the next Star Trek movie also has an awesome premise. Right now, we don't know much about the next movie in the franchise, but what we do know seems super interesting. We know the next Star Trek prequel movie is going to be set on Earth, for the most part, and we know that it is going to tell the story of how humanity first began interacting with alien life. That story is so interesting that there is already a Star Trek movie and TV show addressing it. Star Trek First Contact and Star Trek Enterprise. But there are 88 years in between First Contact and Enterprise. And that is an 88-year gap that this new movie could fill with an incredible story without being a threat to Star Trek canon. Whereas First Contact and Enterprise largely focus on events in space, the fact that this new movie will be planet-side by and large means that it will have a completely new narrative scope. Setting this new movie on Earth all but guarantees we will see a return to a more diplomatic era of Trek. One of the greatest strengths of The Next Generation is Captain Jean-Luc Picard's Patrick Stewart unfailing dedication to diplomacy and the philosophical and political antics that follow from it. Setting this new movie on Earth all but guarantees we will see a return to a more diplomatic era of Trek. If one of the greatest shortcomings of Star Trek Section 31 was that it felt too much like a generic action movie, this coming Star Trek film is primed to make an epic comeback. When Star Trek Section 31 was first announced back in 2019, it set fandom abuzz with the tantalizing prospect of Michelieu leading a spy thriller set in one of Star Trek's most enigmatic corners. Section 31, the Federation's clandestine intelligence agency, has long been a source of fascination and unease, offering a morally gray counterpoint to Starfleet's utopian ideals. But as the years dragged on with shifting release schedules, development purgatory, and finally the news that the project was no longer going to be a full series but a standalone streaming film, many fans were understandably disappointed. The grand ambitions of a full series exploring the shadows of the Federation had seemingly collapsed into a smaller, more contained production. Yet, in classic Star Trek fashion, what seems like a loss on the surface may, in fact, be the best possible outcome for the franchise's narrative future, especially as Paramount doubles down on its plans for a Star Trek prequel film set decades before Kirk and Spock ever took the bridge of the Enterprise. To understand why Section 31's setback is secretly beneficial, we need to consider what makes prequels in the Star Trek universe uniquely challenging. Unlike many sprawling sci-fi franchises, Star Trek's core appeal has always rested on a specific ideological foundation: humanity's future as a peaceful, enlightened, exploratory species. Layering that ethos with too much political intrigue or moral ambiguity, especially in an era preceding the optimistic 23rd century, risks diluting the aspirational clarity that defines Trek. The proposed prequel movie, said to center around Starfleet's early days and humanity's tentative first steps into interstellar diplomacy, stands at a crossroads. On one hand, it offers an opportunity to enrich the backstory of familiar elements like Starfleet's Prime Directive, early encounters with the Vulcans, and the foundations of the United Federation of Planets. On the other hand, it could easily veer into darker territory that feels at odds with the hopeful vision of John Roddenberry. Here's where the recalibrated Section 31 movie becomes an asset. By condensing the spy thriller narrative into a focused, one-off film, Paramount can effectively quarantine the morally ambiguous espionage plots into a self-contained story. Michelle Yeoh's Philippa Georgiou, a mirror universe empress turned reluctant Federation operative, is the perfect avatar to explore Star Trek's darker corners, but in a limited, digestible dose. Rather than stretching shades of gray across multiple seasons and potentially muddling the tone of concurrent Trek shows or films, Section 31's streamlined format allows the franchise to compartmentalize its intrigue. In other words, Section 31 can get its hands dirty so the prequel movie doesn't have to. This division of labor is crucial. By clearing narrative space, the prequel film can fully embrace a cleaner, more idealistic tone without the baggage of Federation conspiracies lurking around every starbase. Instead of having to shoehorn Section 31 into the origins of Starfleet, thereby complicating what should be a story about aspirational exploration, the prequel can chart its own course, unburdened by pre-existing spycraft machinations. Moreover, Section 31's repositioning as a film rather than a series lowers the risk of continuity snarls that would have inevitably emerged over multiple seasons. The Star Trek timeline is already intricate, and inserting a sprawling, serialized story about secret agencies operating in the 23rd century could have muddled key historical events. A standalone Section 31 movie, however, can function as a narrative cul-de-sac, impactful in the moment but neatly cordoned off, ensuring the broader franchise remains coherent. There's also the matter of fan reception. While many Trek enthusiasts enjoy Section 31's shadowy machinations, especially from its Deep Space Nine days, there's always been tension around how far the concept should go. By the 32nd century of Star Trek, Discovery, the Federation's flirtation with morally dubious tactics had grown contentious. Leaning too hard on Section 31 as an ongoing pillar of the franchise risked alienating viewers who prefer Trek's brighter, more hopeful storytelling. The upcoming prequel film can sidestep this landmine by focusing instead on diplomatic idealism, scientific wonder, and the